Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckcom. My next guest is retired Marine Corps Combat Officer John Francis Warren. John is one of the baddest men I know, as well as one of the best leaders I've ever met, and I also consider him to be one of my best friends. Following graduation from Texas A&M, John was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps, where he became an infantry officer in California at Camp Pendleton. John served as the tip of the spear, serving with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, leading combat operations in Southern Afghanistan immediately after 9/11. His unit was one of the first sets of boots on the ground in Afghanistan after 9/11. Truly the tip of the spear. After his combat experience, which we talk about a lot in this show and which is absolutely riveting, John was selected as one of 12 instructors at the Infantry Officer course and became the deputy director. And what that means is that John was the Marine who taught incoming Marines how to be Marines. It doesn't get any more badass than that, folks. John ultimately served our country as a Marine honorably for 9 years, after which he resigned his commission and joined the commercial construction industry. John has led over $1.3 billion in major construction projects. That's billion with a B, including buildings valued at $117 million, $100 million, and even the Alamo Master Plan currently underway, which is valued at $200 million. John is currently the president of HJD Capital, a commercial construction company in San Antonio, where he lives with his wife, boys, and 3 dogs. John Francis Warren is leadership. You'll learn what he thinks about toughness, grit, perseverance, and leading men through difficult times during this incredible show. And now I give you retired Marine Corps Combat Officer and all-around badass, John Francis Warren.
Hey, everybody. Brian Beckcom. And I have got one of my best friends, John Warren. John, how the heck you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic, Brian. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. We were talking right before the podcast, and I said I was scoping out your LinkedIn profile, and I was like, man, John and I, we're both getting a little bit older. I hadn't seen you in a while. You got some gray hair. I got some gray on my chin when I grow a beard, but you look good, man. You look real good.
The beard, likewise. Thank you. The beard is really the giveaway. Like now, if I give it 3 days worth of growth, it's like 90% gray. That and then the thinning of the head. I'm glad I'm 6'3" because not many people can see down on my bald head, but it is. Every year I go through about, I don't know, 3 or 4 times of contemplating just shaving it. Like it'd be so much easier, but I'm such an ugly bastard with the shaved head.
And I've seen you with a shaved head. And
dude,
me too. I'm not too much better because my head is so big that when you shave off all the hair, it makes it look about twice as big as it really is. So.
I've got like this pterodactyl like ridge line going over my head. It's just at OCS. Everybody would see me the first day before we get our, scalped, and then we come out of the barbershop and all the Marine candidates would be like, "You are one ugly motherfucker." My God. Yeah. I need my hair. Anyway.
Yeah, John. So it's good to see you, man. And we've known each other forever. And like I said, I consider you to be one of my best friends. And so let me ask you before we.
And that's mutual. And that's mutual, by the way.
Well, thank you for saying that. And John, this is a leadership podcast, and like I can't really think of that many people that I know that exude leadership more than you do. You were a captain in the United States Marine Corps, a combat officer in the United States Marine Corps. You've basically been in leadership positions since we met. Since I've known you, you've been in some sort of leadership position. As a matter of fact, and I want to talk about this a little bit, not only were you a combat officer in the United States Marine Corps, but you were an instructor and the deputy director at the basic school and at Infantry Officer School, which is a big deal. And so I want to talk about a lot of the leadership principles that you've learned, that you've implemented when you've led men and women. So before we get into your experience, in particular in the Marine Corps, who is John Warren? Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, a little bit about your background, how you ended up in the Marine Corps, things like that.
All right. I'll try to be brief. And I think most importantly, I come from a very nuclear family, married mother and father, which is critical. But the family originated from Alsace-Lorraine. So like mid 1800s, immigrated to this, the Castro colonies were Alsatians. So, Castroville, Queehee, Texas, D'Hanis, Texas. So, was raised in a very farming, ranching, outdoor environment, and that's still who I am, and that's who my entire family is. In fact, we were raised, you take care of your family, you earn a living, and you take care of the land.
Yeah.
And also very, all veterans. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, class of 45 at A&M, letterman in football and in baseball, but left when he was 16 years old as a sophomore. He was 17. He started at A&M, leaving D'Hanis, taking the trains back and forth. It was ultimately made a second lieutenant. Middle of A&M, was in Germany, and ultimately came home, finished his education, and graduated. Much like many of the that era of the 44, 45, 46-year grads. My father, he came from Bethesda, Maryland, so call it the Mid-Atlantic area. Again, all Catholics. He found his way into the Marine Corps. He was a second lieutenant, combat engineer. My father-in-law was a 2-star admiral, Naval Academy guy. This is Carrie's father, fighter pilot. Ultimately, commanded the Constellation, the Midway, and he retired kind of in that tailhook Bill Clinton era. So the military is definitely, along with farming, ranching, and the outdoors, is part of just who we are. Born and raised in San Antonio, obviously went to A&M along with you, 92 to the 90s. We class of 96, graduated in 97. Same, father was in construction, built swimming pools, and that's where I gravitated to. I thought I wanted to be an anesthesiologist because all the doctors I knew were rich and had cool guns and cool cars and stuff like that. Yeah. And I did enjoy biology and life sciences type stuff. But once inorganic, organic chemistry hit, while I was a sophomore in the Corps at A&M, I mean, it was a little much. So ultimately transferred to the construction department. Loved every second of it with Toby. But I knew I was going to be a Marine officer from the time I was a little boy. That's what I was going to do. So ultimately, those things fell into place. Graduated and just went through the full Marine Corps pipeline and all the different OCSs and TBS type stuff. Ended up in infantry, which was the goal, which is super competitive. It's nerve-wracking to even think about, just trying to earn your destiny. Ended up in California, loved it at Camp Pendleton, was with 1st Marines, Rifle Platoon Commander, a deployment, and then an 81 millimeter mortar platoon commander, and then a deployment which led us into September 11th in Afghanistan. Then back to Quantico, where I was an instructor at the basic school for a short period, and then moved across the street to what we used to call the man school, the infantry officer course, which is a badass job. Top 12 infantry captains, just pressing, we're pushing the envelope as hard as we can to create the coolest, best training to prepare the lieutenants. And your hours are super irregular. There's no, set time and place to be like 7 a.m. to 6 at night. I mean, you could not work all day because you're going to work all night, train lieutenants at, during some operation, which is all great guys. And it was, it's super rewarding and fulfilling to take a young, untrained lieutenant and in a short period of time, 10 or 11 weeks, get them ready to go take over and be the platoon commander. And at that period of time, they're going to combat. So about, I think I was 9 years in, tough decision to resign. And I knew I knew where I needed to be. It was kind of part of the long-term plan of let's go in the Marine Corps for a while, get experience, grow up, and then, make a career in construction and development, which I resigned on August the 5th of 2005 at Quantico, and I literally took off the camis and put on the hard hat for Clark Construction, where we were doing the base housing at Quantico. So it's hard to leave the Marine Corps. Yeah. But to then know that my job was still taking care of Marines, building their homes, which were desperately needed. This is part of that whole
badass. That's badass.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. As hard as things were, that was the silver lining. So that was like a $250 million job. Didn't know a thing about construction, even though it was my degree. None of it was applicable. So just, they threw you into the deep end and gave you the swim test, and, just figured it out, and then went up the road to Fort Belvoir and did the same thing. So I started out as an assistant superintendent. They really didn't know, is this guy going to survive or not, and figured it out. Finally became a project executive, went to Fort Belvoir. That was like a $350 million job. And this is now 5 or 6 years in, and just beating up and down I-95. We were 23 miles from the project to the house. Sometimes it would take 3 hours to get home. So it's just really hard.
Yeah.
Carrie, about that time, she was promoted to vice president back in California, same stomping ground where we lived when we were in the Marines. And she said, hey, I got offered a VP with this thing. And I said, babe, you go do that. Okay. I'll resign, and I will button up the house, get it sold, take care of the kids, and we'll meet you out there. So she went out and found the house, and I took it from there, basically. And I remember Jack was like in the 2nd grade, and I had to show him, right, we had to go meet his teacher that night. And I printed out a bunch of pictures at the office of just all the coolest things in California: wave surfing, the skiing in the snow, Disneyland, and literally we're driving to his school. And I hand him the package of pictures. I said, what do you think about that, Jack? He's like, cool. Oh, wow, is that snow? And he's like, when can we go? And I said, well, tomorrow if you want to. And he said, yes, let's go. I said, well, so we're not going to go meet your teacher either, okay? And he's like, no, that's okay. I want to go there. So I'm not embellishing at all. Packed up the house, and flew down to San Antonio, then out to California. It was, and they loved it. So a short story that's now much longer than I intended, but lived in California with Clark for like 8 years, lived at the beach. We were beach bums. We were totally cool. It's just sitting on the beach watching waves, and that's it.
Nice.
But when it's right there, it's kind of just what you do. Our life was about the beach and surfing and fishing. Our house, all tile floors covered in sand. There's sand everywhere. You just get used to it. There's an outdoor shower. You come in, you rinse off. There's wetsuits everywhere. There's always where kids are at our house with surfboards and wetsuits. It was just, that's the lifestyle, and it's pretty cool. But at the same time, the love for Texas and my family and my friends here never left, never subsided. We're always trying to figure out how to get back. And it was one day Carrie said, we were here for Christmas, like we were every year, and Christmas had occurred. We'd shipped all the boxes down to San Antonio, so Santa, would show up at Mom and Dad's house here, and then New Year's we'd pack everything back up that we just shipped here to then ship it all the way back to California. So it's New Year's Day. I'm in the garage. I'm starting to get everything together, which is a pain in the ass. And Carrie walks out in tears, and she says, "I can't do this again. We've got to be here." And I said, "Are you serious?" He said, I am. I said, let's do it. Wow. I can't leave my project. I was running the Long Beach Civic Center at the time, which is a $400 million job. Great team, great job. And I wasn't just going to up and roll on. That was a great opportunity. So I commuted for about 2 or 3 months, which I will tell you, to go home to your empty house without your dogs, without your kids, is the closest thing to divorce I've ever experienced. And it was awful.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Yeah.
And out of the blue, and I'm almost done. Out of the blue, I get a phone call from my president. He says, "Hey, we won some bank job in San Antonio. I think it's about 150 million. I hear what's going on, that you're commuting and your wife's in San Antonio, but we'd like you to come back to San Antonio and build that project and take over the state for Clark." And it was one of those things where it's like, did I just hear what I think I heard? Hung up the phone. I called my best friend. I said, well, who's got a big $150 million bank in San Antonio? And he Googled it, and then he sent me a picture of the Frost Tower in San Antonio, which, it's a Clark Pelly design. It's this big twisting glass high-rise that towers over the entire San Antonio skyline. Not the tallest, but it's just unique. So it was a pinch me moment, Brian. Serendipitous is probably the best word, because at that point, Clark handled everything. The move, it was all taken care of. Where I was facing all these challenges. How do we figure all this out and survive, a marriage and kids and not mess this up? So that's really where we've been the last 4 or 5 years here. Lived with my mother for a while. I mean, it was just, it brought just it all back how things started in San Antonio. Ultimately, we found a home and continued to chase work and try to grow this business unit.
Hey, do me a favor. Tell your mom I said hi. Is she doing okay?
She's doing great. She asked me the other day, and you all know it's probably been it's now 6 years almost 6 years since my father passed away, but
Yeah.
she's doing great. But, she would say, I just don't know what my purpose is, because she's spent an entire life taking care of raising kids and making a family what it is. And your role in life is still to take care of the collective family, Blake's family, my family, and make sure that all the kids are raised in the environment just like we were raised.
Yeah.
Keep moms and dads in check and make sure we're keeping the spirit.
You're the matriarch. She's the matriarch of the family, right?
She almost is the matriarch, and that's funny. My grandmother, we finally put her in a home in January against her will, but she just continued to fall, and it was like, goodness, we got to do something. And then as COVID hit, they put those people on lockdown. Like, they cannot leave their room for like 28 days, like not leave your room. Yeah. So she's going crazy. So finally there was a window of opportunity that my mom could break her out, and she did. And so my grandmother is living large with my mother, getting taken care of well. So it's all, and mind you, I live 3 blocks away. I'm just down the street from where I grew up. So it's too funny, and I love it. I never thought I would be this happy in San Antonio, right where, I grew up, having lived on the beach in Dana Point. I wouldn't have it another way right now.
Man, I love to hear that. And I've always loved your mom. So please tell her I said hi, and I'm glad to hear she's doing well. So John, let's rewind a little bit, because I want to hear from you. So I was going to ask you, I knew your dad was a Marine. I did not know your father-in-law was an admiral. Did not know your grandfather was a letterman and a Marine. Was he a Marine too, your grandfather?
Oh, Army. He was Army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you and I come from a kind of a similar upbringing. My dad and granddad were both Air Force officers. My uncle was a chief master sergeant. My mom was a nurse, blah, blah, blah. I grew up in a military family. I did not end up going the military route. 4 years in the Corps of Cadets was plenty for me. But I was going to ask you, like, when was it that you first decided, look, John Warren is going to be a Marine Corps officer? Like, how old were you, and what was it exactly that drove you to that profession?
I don't think I knew at the time. I was really young. In fact, I had my mother since taken them down, but since I was probably 4 or 5, I had the old school Marine Corps bumper stickers. Like, if you remember, it was a green camouflage sticker and yellow writing. It just said Marines.
Yeah.
There's another one it was just the scarlet red with white letters that said, we're looking for a few good men.
Yeah. Those
were on my window since, my entire childhood, and probably just out of love and respect for my father, like any kid, I wanted to be just like him. But he would tell me, he said, John, I remember when I was a young lieutenant, and I would look in the mirror, and I couldn't think of being a better person or a better line of work. I couldn't be more proud of who I was.
Yeah.
You're unstoppable. There's nothing that you need. The Marine Corps is giving you everything that you need to be successful. And that was a pretty young age. And that probably was enough for me. But also, and what I didn't know, and this kind of ties in a few questions that you mentioned earlier about, becoming and getting into leadership role. I went through high school and I was a really normal kid. I wasn't a natural athlete. I developed late. Sports, we did it, but I was never, the star player, so I really wasn't involved in student council or, fact of the matter is there wasn't any leadership roles or challenging things that I did in high school. So there was this potential, there was this thing down inside that existed that I didn't know was there. I wanted to be like my father. I enjoyed doing hard and challenging things, but it wasn't until the Corps of Cadets and, all of a sudden all the piss heads yelling at you. And then there was the fish drill team, tryout day. That's all holy hell breaks loose. And it got me going, man.
Yeah.
Like it tapped a nerve.
Yeah.
Like, I like this. I like this a lot.
Yeah.
And those guys that are yelling at me, Matt Good, Jake Banks, Jim Welsh, the crew, I thought they were really badass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did too. When I saw those guys, I was like, that's who I want to be like.
Those
guys are kick ass. Like, I want to be like those guys.
That's exactly what it was. And it was their influence. And not all of them were good. I probably don't want to tell those stories here, but not all of the influence was good because we were pretty crazy. But it was overcoming those challenges that I didn't know that I had. I didn't know I had the ability to do that and to do some really hard things and just mentally get through it, that all of a sudden it all really started to add up, specific to the Marine Corps, that this was the right job for me. And I hate to ever call it a job. It never felt like a job, but it was the next, right step for me. But the influence of just the examples that was set, that was the first mark on me after my parents or any other teachers. A coach never influenced me, but it was those piss heads out on the drill team that were the first men that shaped my leadership style.
Nice.
And a lot of things, were happening at the same time, physically maturing, mentally maturing, and then you're faced with all these different challenges. And it was guys like that, you then move on from role model to role model to role model. And that's how, at least for me, that's how my leadership has been developed. And I think that continues. We all
it's interesting, John, from my perspective, and one of the cool things about interviewing all the people that I've interviewed some super cool people, is you start to see patterns emerge. And one of the patterns that's been interesting to me is, there have been a couple people on my podcast that have expressed some self-doubt, like particularly when they started off in their career, their profession, that you would have, looking from the outside, you would never think that this particular person would have had any self-doubt. They just appeared confident. And John, from my perspective, when I first met you, I'm like, there's certain people, and I'm sure you've experienced, like when you first met Matt Good, you knew that he was going to be a badass Marine. You just knew it. It was literally like God reached into the dictionary for the definition of a great Marine Corps officer and pulled out Matt Good. And but it was, for me, it was the same way with you. You're 6'3". When you were in college, you were a big, you were lean, but man, you were a big, strong dude. You look like a Marine. And so it's interesting to hear you say that you had some doubts. You didn't really know much about leadership. You were a little bit unsure about some things, and then you show up and you're put to some challenges. And by the way, for people that don't know, back in the day, the basic idea behind the fish drill team was to run everybody off. Like, just everybody gets run off. And I think back when we were there, they'd start with 200-300 kids and be
300.
20, 30 left when it was all said and done.
I think we had 36 at the end of the day, second semester, and that I was likely going to be one of those that was attrited. And I share this brief story, if I can, just for the young listeners, and overcoming challenges when you don't think you can do it. That was my coming out, I guess, period or moment. It was all over the entire first semester. So as you said, we ran everywhere. And not only did we just run everywhere, we ran in old leather combat boots, the black Cadillacs. And to make matters worse, we put these big old horseshoe taps on our heels.
Yeah.
Just absolutely awful for your body.
Terrible.
Yeah. And whether it was overuse syndrome or I don't recall what the reason was for, but I had really, really bad shin splints. Like, they didn't know who I was. I was the pogue that couldn't run, really for a long period of time, until finally my doctor, I ultimately ended up with a stress fracture. I remember the night we were running down the quad. We were playing Texas Tech, and I finally just collapsed. And it pushed. Every practice I was in tears. getting to and from. I ended up having to walk, absolutely embarrassed. This is not who I was. You know, Matt, none of those guys knew who I was, just because I was the turd that was, you know, hurt. So ultimately ended in a cast up to my hip and was basically confined in my hole for the entire first semester. And all I did was I kept my rifle. They didn't even know it was gone. All my buddies, you know, Daniel Kruzak, the guys, they were going out practicing. They'd come back, tell me the horror stories. And I just sat in my monster and I just drilled and I drilled and I drilled and I drilled. And finally, in the first semester, I squeaked by with a 2.2, and then started to get myself back in shape over the break, running around my neighborhood. My neighbors still laugh at me, have seen me run around in combat boots with a freaking 383 high ported over my head. And I showed back up for Hell Week, and I started drilling, and they were like, "Who the hell is this? Who the hell is this? Who are you?" I didn't know if they were going to let me stay.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't been on the team. I hadn't been officially kicked off or anything, but I just, you know, showed back up. But for whatever reason, and I didn't, that's not who I was. I didn't know I could do that. And for any young listeners, like these challenges that just seem like they're impossible to overcome, they're absolutely critical in your growth and in your confidence that you can overcome damn near anything.
No doubt.
At that point in time, you know, and they finally got to know who I was and, you know, started to get good at what we were doing. It doesn't matter if we were drilling or not. We could have been playing football, basketball, baseball. It doesn't matter. But it was just overcoming that thing and practicing and being determined that moment, more than any, has probably shaped it. That gave me the confidence to get through at least my fifth year. And then every year after that, there's another set of challenges and goals that you have that, you know, you set your sights on and need to be challenging, and you have to push yourself to get to that thing. And every year it seemed like, it landed and it hit whatever those goals were. And I always thought I was lucky, Brian. I always thought I was lucky. And then you finally, after about 8 years of, you know, things have fallen into place, and you look back and you realize it's not luck. It's not that complex of a recipe. There's no magic going on. It's not natural. I mean, it's just, you set your goals, you work hard at it, and you overcome all those obstacles that come in your way, and you're going to get to those goals, and you're going to be better for it once you do. I mean, that's the message I give to my kids, and sometimes it works, sometimes, you know, it doesn't, but for the most part, you know, Jack was the same way with swimming. So I guess I would say is look for those opportunities, look for those challenges that you can't think you can do, and you do it. Carl Baggett used to, go ahead.
Yeah, no, John, I was going to say, and I could not agree with you more. And I'll tell you one thing that I realized probably late in 2019 or so was, you know, I've been successful financially. I've got a good family. I've got a nice house, all that sort of thing. And so I was getting a little complacent, frankly. And I was like, man, I'm getting soft. I'm turning into a little bit of a wimp. I need to push myself, because, like you say, if you just sit around and drink beer and, you know, dip Copenhagen and watch TV and get fat and don't push yourself in any way, you tend to get kind of unhappy. I mean, I was a little bit unhappy. I wasn't putting any pressure on myself. So this year I decided, and by the way, I decided this in late December. I was actually looking at my journal this morning because I wanted to see how things had changed between December 2019 and March of 2020. And to say it was dramatic is an understatement. But, you know, I was like, I need to figure out some things to do to push me. So as a 47-year-old man, I walked into a jiu-jitsu studio by myself. Yeah. I felt like a complete idiot when I first walked in. The first couple of times I'm in there, I'm just getting my ass kicked by guys that I outweigh by 50 pounds and that aren't athletic. And it was tough. But I'll tell you, every time I walked out of a jiu-jitsu class, I just had this giant smile on my face. I was like, yes. And like, I just got back, you know, we had to shut it.
Testosterone hard on or something.
For sure. And you're just like, you just feel like this soreness. Like, so I got back into it because we had to stop, of course, during the quarantine. And we just now got to where we could kind of go back and do some real rolling and some sparring and stuff with appropriate precautions in place. But man, I was like, I come out of there, I'm so sore, but it's a good sore. It's like an accomplishment sore. You know what
I don't know if that applies to going to jiu-jitsu, but it always seems like those accomplishments, those challenges or obstacles, I always have the most anxiety and I'm nervous going into it for the fear of failure.
Yeah, for sure.
And when I overcome that fear of failure, or even if we used to box at IOC, and I was always nervous every time, and I could fight, I could hold my own at least, but young lieutenant can always slip one in on you and just embarrass the shit out of you. But once you get, which never happened, thankfully, once you get through it, and even presentations, there's that feeling of accomplishment. But it always starts with the jitters or anxiety. When I don't have that in your accomplishment, it's not like it wasn't that much. Growth did not occur, I don't think.
I still get nervous before every trial. I get really nervous. I'm a little bit sweaty and clammy and anxious. Yeah. When I first started trying cases, I had a Air Force jet pilot who flew in Vietnam tell me his very first jury trial, he went into the bathroom right beforehand and threw up twice. He was so nervous. And I was like, what? I mean, you flying combat missions in Vietnam where your life's at risk and you're nervous about this. And oh yeah, man, just as nervous. And I still get nervous even today after 20 plus years of doing it. And part of that, John, I think is because I care, because I want the result to be good. But the other part is it's I've heard it said that fear or anxiety is just the flip side of excitement. So one thing I've heard is like, if you're nervous about something, whether it be a presentation or you're going in to, roll with a black belt or something like that, is reframe in your mind that nervousness into excitement. Like those feelings you're having are identical essentially. The feelings of anxiety are the same identical feelings you have when you're excited about something, when you're anticipating something. And so I don't know if that makes any sense to you, John, but let me ask you, let me, because there's, I want to get to your time as an instructor of Marine Corps officers, because to me, in my mind, I was thinking about this morning. So we've got in my jiu-jitsu studio, we've got like the head dude, the professor, the Brazilian guy with a black belt with a red stripe, right? But there's a bunch of other black belts in the gym, and you go in there and you see those black belts in there and they're just kicking everybody's butt. But when the professor walks in, everybody kind of stops what they're doing. Everybody shows him respect because everybody knows that he's the king of that gym. And so you're kind of like the black belt with the red tip when you're a Marine Corps captain instructing other lieutenants. But let's talk about, John, because you and I, we've had some conversations about this through the years, but not many. And I'm really interested to know about your experience in combat. And in particular, I want to tell you what it was, what it was like from my perspective, and then like what I was seeing you do, and then you tell from your perspective. So the way I remember it, John, was I think you were on a ship somewhere in the Pacific at the time when 9/11 happened. Yeah.
I'll walk through it real quick, and I'll get to the IOC part quickly, but it was the 15th MEU, U.S. Peleliu. Married in July, you were there, and then we left San Diego mid-August. A couple weeks later, September the 8th of 2001, we're in Australia training. Get everything back onto the ship. We had a night of liberty. We're acting like Marines having a good time out in town. We're in Darwin, Australia, trying to make the most of it. And we were all on a big old phone bank of phones talking to our wives and fiancés and mothers and whatnot. And that's right when the planes hit the towers. I was talking to Carrie, as all my other, roommates were talking to their wives, and it all happened and interrupted at the exact same time. So you can imagine this little cow town, it was a scene out of a movie. Everybody's getting rides back to the ship, hanging out of trucks, and 10 people squeezing into cabs to get back to the ship. War talk, and fast forward, we end up in the Arabian Sea. We were starting.
Not to interrupt you, but there was a time I remember where you used to be able to email some of your friends from the ship, and then all of a sudden, none of us heard from you for months. You just went completely silent for months.
Yep. And they shut down email. And what I could email, it was kind of like just watch CNN or watch Fox News and send me send me as much Copenhagen and instant coffee that you can fit in a package, which is the truth.
Yeah.
Which, interestingly enough, I think it was, if we get into November, so about Thanksgiving, we were in Jacobabad, Pakistan, and some people.
How did you get so you go from Australia to the you
So
said
we,
Arabian
so
Sea?
we're an amphibious ready group. So it's a big marine kind of helicopter carrier and a couple other support ships. One that holds the Amtraks and one that holds the little small black boats. And the carrier holds all the helicopters and the Harriers.
Yeah.
And I was always in a helicopter company. So that's how we would get to wherever we needed to go. So some people.
When did you know, John? When did you know I'm going to war? When did you first? When did that realization first? Like, I am going into combat.
We all thought we were going. As soon as the planes hit the towers, we knew that we were the lucky guys at the right place at the right time. That we were there. Our purpose in life was to do exactly what we did. We were the most forward deployed, ready, unit of any service that's conventional, that could influence the situation.
So your unit was truly the tip of the spear when it came to the Afghan war. I mean, your unit was there before pretty much anybody, correct?
We prepared, Southern Afghanistan for all follow-on forces to come through.
Talk about how you did that. Yeah.
Well, mind you, I'm talking about conventional. So we had force reconnaissance. We had, I guess what we call battalion reconnaissance. We were all special operations capable, but there was the CIA that was there. And there were other Delta type operators, and there were SEALs that were there before us. Yeah. In essence, preparing what was called a forward operating base, a FOB. This was called FOB Rhino, little desert airstrip in the middle of southern Afghanistan, about an hour south of Kandahar. And, our mission was really to set up a blocking position, because the coalition forces were pushing the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda south through Afghanistan. And we were this blocking position to the south, so that, nothing could move south down through Afghanistan. So ultimately we took over Kandahar as well, which I think Will Hurd mentioned the other day. It was all part of that same operation early on. So yeah, it was Thanksgiving Day or day before Thanksgiving, and we left Pakistan and we inserted into FOB Rhino like at 2 a.m. And it's all holy hell's going on. There's just rotor going everywhere. There's planes landing. There's helicopters landing. I cannot believe nobody got hurt, because you couldn't see anything. You carry
fog, the fog of war, right?
Yeah, and you're carrying so much blessed gear you can barely move. We were 81s, and so we had heavy or medium-sized mortars, and all of our ammunition.
Yeah.
And all your small arms ammunition and grenades and smokes, and because they said you need to be prepared to survive for 60 days with limited resupply.
Yeah.
So it's like, shit, well, I'm going to throw away some underwear so I can fit more logs of Copenhagen in my pack.
So what are you thinking, John? I asked Blake this, I asked Toby this, I asked Nick Calt this. What are you thinking when it's actually for real? Like when you're actually going in to a hot combat zone, what is going through your mind? Is it excitement? Is it fear? Is it a combination of the two? I mean, what's going through your head when you know this is no longer a drill? I'm actually going to go where people might be shooting at me.
My experience is different from those that you mentioned, because this was the first. I mean, the way we all looked at this is that we were fortunate. This is our purpose. This is what we trained for.
Yeah. And
finally, we get to do it for real, and I don't have to just go on a libo cruise, meaning nothing happened, you come back home. Like we consider ourselves lucky that our number got called. And looking back on talking with Matt Good and people like that, they were all, congratulatory.
Nice.
That's a different mindset than after you got hit in the nose a bunch of times, whether it was up in northern Afghanistan or whether it was, in Iraq or, where things really got nasty and lots of men and women got hurt and killed. So I'm in a different point of kind of where this, both of these wars happened. So nothing really bad had happened. So I give you that background because there definitely was not scared. It was just, if anything, I was just nervous about when the time came that my platoon was tested, could we could we succeed?
Yeah.
If there was any fear, it was that. I wasn't worried about my life. I wasn't worried about, getting hurt. It was just, are we going to be successful when we're truly tested? And I think that's part about being external.
Yeah.
Versus the internal, and you're trained that way. So that's the best answer I can give you. Other than we were tested one time, and fortunately, we would run these drills every night before it got dark, before everything kind of settled down, just so if we got hit in the middle of the night, it wasn't the first time we touched our mortars, in 4 or 5 days. So. Yeah. Fortunately, that paid off. The unit performed flawlessly, and it was great. But that same feeling that I had isn't necessarily. I mean, I had to send some Marines back to the ship. They were wigging out. They were
really,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there was reports, all of the intel coming in. They were doing everything they could to keep us, prepared and alert. Like Taliban or. There's patrols that are out there and they can't infiltrate through your lines, and they know that we sleep in fighting holes. They know that we sleep in tents, so they're going to be shooting, a foot or two off the ground. And it just, because it was early, nobody had, at least the young guys hadn't been conditioned or, that's a lot to take in if you're 18, 19 years old.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No doubt. Well, so what was the most surprising or the most shocking or the most unexpected thing that happened? First of all, how long were you deployed to Afghanistan the first time?
I think we were landed in November of 01, and I don't think we pulled out until the March timeframe of 02.
So roughly 6 months, give or take?
And this was, there was no camps. I mean, we were literally in a big circle with the airstrip in the middle, and we all just lived in fighting holes that we had done. I mean, that's what you did. It was actually cold there. So
really interesting.
Yeah. So part of the, I guess that not only did you just keep yourself busy doing it, but you would always continue to dig in and reinforce your position. It kept you warm, and it was a workout.
You're still digging holes today too. We might talk about that a little bit at the end.
I know. So I'll be honest with you. I mean, I was there for Christmas and New Year's, and it will always be one of the most special Christmases that I've ever had or experienced in my life to be in Afghanistan with my Marines. We had this super stealthy fire pit, because the 81 millimeter mortar platoons, generally speaking, have a reputation for having the most fun. Our call sign was no love. I had about 100 Marines at the time. Just a bunch of partiers, and so everybody always came to my position to smoke cigarettes and break bread, and they could heat their MRE over the little tactical fire that we had. I mean, General Mattis, he would come to my position damn near every day and come hang out with the mortar guys with no love.
Yeah.
In fact, forgot that there's an HBO series about Marines. Reconnaissance Marines, and that was the same recon platoon that was with us in Afghanistan, and so it was I'll think of it in a minute, but they were always in our position. It was just the place to be. So you asked a question about what was the most surprising thing. I don't know how we got on to digging fighting holes and fires, but there was a few episodes. One night we got hit, or my FO, Charlie FO, saw a patrol and saw some lights, enemy bad guys out there, and he called in, a fire mission. It went down through I think it's, if I can recall, the FSC, the fire support coordinator, and they cleared me hot to do a fire for effect. And at the same time, behind us in the middle, they lifted up 2 escort helicopters as a Cobra and a Huey to go out and kind of see what was going on and support. At the same time, they dispatched a group of armored Humvees with turret mounted heavy machine guns, 50 cals and 40 millimeter cannons, and everything just erupted because one of the helicopters, when it was going up, it flipped over due to the brownout, and just this gigantic fireball explosion right behind our position. I haven't told this story in a long time. We had just dropped a 4-round fire for effect. That means four mortar cannons, all dropped four rounds with a high explosive in a proximity mix, HE prox mix. So, 16 rounds that have a 40-yard killing radius all just went out and blew up something out there. At the same time, this explosion happens behind us, and then somewhere the Humvees got lost, whether they were behind the lines, in front of the lines, and all this chatter is going on at the radio at the same time, because the Humvees were they could see movement, but they were seeing friendly movement. They weren't seeing enemy movement. They were just completely disoriented, and with the helicopter catching on fire, us shooting and them lost, it was absolute chaos.
It sounds like chaos. Sounds like utter chaos. Yeah.
And to make matters worse,
and you're smiling when you're describing this.
Yeah, too. I remember I couldn't, my hand was shaking so bad that I couldn't write coordinates that were coming in.
Oh yeah.
It was freaking adrenaline overload. But to make matters worse, the helicopter that was this ball of fire right now, and to just let you know, everybody survived, minor injuries. They were able to somehow jump out. I don't know how they did it.
Yeah.
They were able to, the crew and the pilots were able to jump out, so 4 of them. But there was no fire rescue to put this thing out, so it had to just burn down. Part of it burning down, which happened quickly, is it was cooking off all of the machine gun rounds that were on board of this. So next thing you know, and this is in the midst of all this chaos, we're taking tracer fire. There's tracer fire coming over my
gosh. Oh, shit.
So, and then there's nobody knew. I mean, nobody knew immediately that it was the helicopter. They thought somebody had infiltrated our lines and it's now shooting at us. So now all my Marines were faced outside the perimeter, facing in the perimeter. And when this happened, I remember when this happened, I had finally had a moment to go out and take a leak. And I just scurried outside of kind of these big earthen walls that we had built. And
I think I would have just gone in my pants at that point.
Yeah. And was taking a leak, and all of a sudden, that's when we started taking fire. And I remember that I'd forgotten my helmet at my, where I was sitting inside of the CP. So I'm sitting out there, pinned down without my Kevlar on like a bad Marine, which was a good example that I used. Like, guys, it has to stay with you everywhere you go. But that was exciting. And finally, everything settled down, and finally the sun came up and everybody got oriented. But, none of our folks were hurt, but it was a lesson for all of us that you can get hit at any moment, and you need to make every single preparation or coordination that you can so that utter chaos doesn't erupt. And maybe it was a little bit more controlled than the way I just told the story, but I don't think so. There was a lot of craziness happening on, everybody's just so excited. That was the first contact. Everybody was so excited to just, kill some Taliban. I mean, we all thought we were going to capture bin Laden.
Well, and that's an incredible story. And, the mentality that you guys have, talking about, we wanted to do this. Like, this was our training. I was talking to, Nick Kalt, who spent time in Fallujah. I think you probably know Nick. Well, he's a firefighter now in California.
Yeah.
And I'm actually talking to him tomorrow about firefighting. And I said, man, what do you guys, what are your thoughts on this? This was a couple months ago before all these fires started. He goes, what do you think about when there's a fire? He goes, well, of course we don't want there to be fires, but we want to show that our training is effective. Like, we're excited when this happens. So John, you were there for about 6 months, and then was that your only deployment in the Middle East?
That was so during combat, yes. So I had a previous deployment, which was a Libo cruise, and then the trip to Afghanistan. That was my last deployment in the Fleet Marine Forces, and that's when I took orders back to Quantico to be an instructor at the basic school in IOC.
And how did you get picked to be an instructor? So the basic school, tell people, for people that don't know much about the military, the Marine Corps, what the basic school is and how they choose the instructors for the basic school.
So it's 6 months. So it's the school. So you're commissioned. Everybody's a commissioned lieutenant, but all you've done is gone through OCS or gone to the Naval Academy. You show up at the basic school, and they, every walk of life has gotten, through OCS or the Naval Academy. You show up at TBS to go through a 6 month training program that essentially trains you to be a rifle platoon commander. Doesn't matter if you're a pilot or artillery guy or logistician. We all learn the same fundamental skills of how to lead a platoon. The way they ultimately select your MOS, if you're an aviator, you showed up with a contract to go to Pensacola after you graduate from the basic school, no matter what. For the rest of us, they break you down into thirds: top third, middle third, bottom third, all based on your overall academic and leadership, peer evaluation, instructor evaluation. So just this combined score. And then the top of each third in sequence gets their first pick with the available jobs or positions that are, can be there. So for example, if the infantry had, call it 18 slots available, the top 6 people in the top third, the top 6 people in the middle third, and the top 6 in the bottom third could get their pick. So you really, the only way you can determine your destiny in terms of your MOS that you want is by being probably in the top 10 of the top third. Otherwise, it's a total, yeah. So that's just how, and that's for every single job. Human intelligence, ground intelligence, tanks, artillery, infantry, all of those, even supply. And so that's why there's some studs that found themselves in the bottom third of the top third, that there were no more infantry combat arms positions available. And unfortunately, and this is all very intentional. We need to spread the talent across every, MOS in the Marine Corps. And I still think that's what they're doing to this day. But so to get selected, and I don't know how it goes, but I know it's not, they just don't take a warm body. That you have to get, recommended, and there's a hand selection. And I think back in the day, at least, they would take 1 or 2 infantry officers per battalion, just because you don't need that many instructors. But that period, and it may sound odd, and again, it kind of had to do with, it was enduring freedom. We hadn't gone to Iraq yet, hadn't been a bunch of bloody noses yet, so it was still a, call it kinetic, or only a few people. I think a few people died in total. So coming back to California and then seeing other people in Afghanistan and seeing the Rangers up in Afghanistan, that's when things got real. But what's interesting is the emotion. I didn't want to be in the United States. It was like I'm missing out, and I need to be back over there, which is hard to tell your wife. But emotionally, that's what I know I went through, and a lot of other Marines, and I'm sure soldiers went through, is you miss that, however hard you miss that. And it continues. And then as I, came back, then there's all these talks of Iraq, and it's like, shit, I'm going to miss that too. I've got 3 years to be here at the basic school. It's hard to understand and even describe why and how that feels, but that probably would, for me, that was the hardest part of the war. And I mean, just this period, and lots of emotions going on. Training lieutenants, you become connected with them, and that's part of being a good instructor and a good leader. And you know everything about them, and you know what makes them tick and why, so you can select them or train them the best. And lots of them didn't come home, and you made these guys. I mean, I wish Blake Story was here with me. I mean, he came through. Toby Flynn came through while I was. In fact, Toby, I was reading through some old emails, a scrapbook. Toby was emailing my father early November timeframe about his application to OCS. And I remember he was like, John's with the 15th Mutant. And my dad was like, yeah, but we don't know where he is, but he was supposed to be notified in early December. But it's just funny to see where we were. But Toby came through when I was at the basic school, not in IOC. And you could imagine Toby and I could barely, sit in any environment without like laughing or chuckling. So it's like, I get up on the platform and I teach this thing. Just don't even look at me. Okay? I can't be the captain that starts giggling or something because you asked a dumbass question. So just be cool, please. But I have to commend Toby and Blake and many others like them, that they knew how bad it was. There were already people that were not coming home, and they still had the courage to go into the Marine Corps, and they knew that it was inevitable. they were going to
I
go.
asked both those guys. I said, because they were both unlike you. They both joined after 9/11. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, which I think there should be like a name for the group of men and women that did that, because there's a lot of folks, and you and I know a lot of them, and that's a totally. I mean, they unlike you and Nick Calt, they joined knowing that they were going to war, and that they were going to a hot war, not a war that. I mean, I know you were in a hot war, but like you're talking about,
No,
their
experience was extremely different than mine.
Yeah.
And to know that, and there was enough of this, there was enough bad things when they signed up. So they have my full respect. God bless them.
Well, John, let me ask you this, because so you're an instructor for Marine lieutenants, and literally, I mean, that must have been a huge responsibility, especially during the middle of a hot war, because you're essentially training them how to survive and how to make sure they can keep their men alive when they're over there too. So how do you train people that are already, I mean, if you're in the Marine Corps and you're a second lieutenant, the chances are you're already a pretty good leader, or you already know something about leadership, or you wouldn't be there to begin with. So what was your approach when you are literally a leader teaching other leaders in the Marine Corps?
I try to be concise. I think on the whole, we tried to create the most realistic environment that we could, that the lieutenants they didn't realize it was practice or as play. We try to create these real environments with live rounds and real explosions and real injuries, so that we could put them in the situation and watch or evaluate them and then coach them. I mean, everything, there was always an exercise, an evaluation, and then the coaching. But I think that the number one is that we would just try to create the most realistic environment. Then we changed the curriculum. We would then go spend 2 or 3 weeks out in the Mojave Desert at 29 Palms. It was all live fire, artillery, tanks, jets, everything that we could afford to do just to prepare them for Iraq. And then we would go spend a week at the Mountain Warfare Training Center up in the mountains. Whether it was the winter, whether it was the summer, it was always hard. It was focused on small unit leadership and how to take care of your Marines. So all throughout this, I mean, there's plenty of leadership discussions, but I think the leadership discussions happen on a moment by moment, day by day basis as you're coaching and you're mentoring these. And mentoring is probably the better word. Yeah. It's not training as much as it is mentoring these guys. And if you see a lieutenant that's not, he's not influencing his Marines the right way, even though they were lieutenants, you pull them aside, and kind of like a father-son. That father-son is the best relationship where I can describe that you can visualize what that looked like, and that is where things get hard. And I remember I think it was my first casualty. One of my lieutenants was J.J. Robleski, and he was in my platoon at the basic school, and he had an aviation contract. He wanted to fly Cobras. Just cool cat, New Jersey guy, thick accent, newly married, but he was it. And all the Marines, all lieutenants just absolutely respected JJ. So ultimately I convinced him. I was like, dude, drop this. You don't want to go be a Cobra pilot. You are made to be an infantry leader. You're going to be successful. So he dropped his aviation contract. He became a grunt. And I went to IOC at the same time. He was a student at IOC. So he was my first class. Trained him up. JJ did great. I think he graduated, if not first, he was second. And then, a month or two later, he took a round through his handset on his radio into the N-bar, and he was, KIA, he was instant. And it was just, it's April the 6th. It was so tough to have, you get so close to these guys, to have lost him. And there's many others, but you're stuck here in the United States. You're stuck in Quantico, and, it's and where we lived there, in most of the areas around Quantico, all the families are in the DOD or the DOJ, they're FBI. So you go to work every day, you train, combat and war fighting, Then you come home, and then all the wives have been talking all day, and then all the husbands are on the back deck and they're talking, whether it's me. My next door neighbor was FBI. There's FBI, 3 houses down. So you never got away from it.
Yeah.
It was constant.
All-consuming.
Yeah.
All-consuming. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, again, you could have been in combat. So, but it was a challenging period. I'll be honest with you. It by all means is not what led me to resign, but I will say that having kids and I couldn't imagine another man raising my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to jump right, that's kind of off the top rope, but that I think ultimately was probably the biggest factor for me to not go to my follow-on school and take a company out to Iraq or Afghanistan for that matter. But it was tough. It took 3 years to even look back. Like I left, and it was just everything about Clark and looking forward because it was so emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great book on this topic. I don't know if you ever heard it. There's an author by the name of Sebastian Junger. He was a war correspondent. He's written a bunch of good books, but he wrote a very short book called Tribes. Have you heard of that book? Or Tribe?
No.
And it's about the experience of military combat personnel when they come back to the United States and why so many of them struggle. And part of it is, or a big part of it is, like you were saying earlier, I was talking to Blake about the same deal. He goes, man, that was some of the most intense, but also some of the best times of my life. You're talking about that Christmas in Afghanistan and that esprit de corps, that connection you have. And then you come back and you just can't find that, in the civilian life. It's just not the same. And so Sebastian Junger says, a lot of officers and enlisted folks that come back from combat they just have a hard time readjusting because the intensity of the experience is just so beyond anything we're used to experiencing that it's like a giant letdown almost when you come back. What else he says? He says, we do this for to respect our military, but he's like a lot of military folks like, oh, who's in the military? You get to go on the plane first type of thing. They don't want that. They want to be reintegrated into society and be treated like everybody else. So it's kind of it's a real interesting book. I gave it to my dad and my uncle who were both in combat, and they both liked it a lot. Well, so John, you get out of the Marine, you served honorably, you get out of the Marine Corps, and then you go into the construction industry. And I did not realize that you immediately start building barracks for Marine Corps officers, which is really cool. But let me ask you a couple questions about your work in the construction industry. I want to ask you two questions about that. The first question I want to ask you is, what project or projects are you most proud of? And secondly, I want to ask you how your training in the Marine Corps has helped you in the business world.
First question first is, I don't know if there's one project that stands. I mean, there's a few that are just kind of boring, but I'm, the cool thing about being a builder, and I mean that being a builder, not just a contractor, is that, my line of work, there's this tangible physical thing that you leave behind.
Yeah.
You're not just pushing paper. You're not just, there's this thing that everybody, your kids and your wife, your family know that dad or my husband built that thing. And I here in San Antonio, I think the Frost Tower is what I'm the most proud of. That was just I couldn't have written the story better myself. And that's how we finally got back to San Antonio. And had a wonderful team. It was an absolute, just a blast. Probably the best team I've had. And we started with 2 dudes and just continued to build this up. What could compete with that is we're building the Alamo, the multi-phase Alamo Museum here in San Antonio, which that was, that's been a 2-year pursuit. And that's, my God, that's so meaningful. Haven't built it yet. So, I can't say it's done and, my name's on it, but at least have won it and we're building it now. So the next question you asked was, how is my Marine Corps experience, and I have to add in my Texas A&M Corps Cadets experience influence what do I do every day? And I would say tactically, okay, Marines are maneuverists. And to say it easily or simply, we look for the gaps. We look for the opportunities, and we avoid the surfaces. We're gonna strike an enemy at his weakest point, that I can strike him with expending the least amount of resource to have the greatest impact on him. That's how we think.
Nice.
And that's how it's not that difficult to take that same, strategy, and it's a mental state more than anything. And I guess the opposite of this would be is like a frontal assault.
Yeah, exactly.
In jiu-jitsu, exactly what I'm talking about.
I do. I was thinking about that when you were saying that. It's about uncovering your opponent's soft spots and then taking maximum advantage of that, essentially.
That's right. If I can find an opening to your throat,
yeah,
that's the best, or something like that. But I'm not going to just duke it out with you. So that's the same. And on the spot right here, I don't have a perfect example of that, but that's tactically. And maybe one is a good real estate deal. Take advantage of a softer market where the cost of construction and real estate is a little bit lower. And that, in my opinion, could be was the least amount of resources I can expend to have the most gain. That could be an example that's overly simple. But in terms of leadership, it started with kind of what we were talking about, your fish year and the examples and the leadership that you experienced with your leaders, and you take each one of their positive attributes that fits with your style and who you are. And this just continues through your entire career. And sometimes there's major shifts there, and you're like, what, I was just kind of doing what people were telling me to do. It's much more natural for me, and I'm getting a lot more, I guess I can sense my influences better based on I can chill out and be a little bit more relaxed, or whatever that thing is. But good leadership is good leadership, Brian, and you're as good of a leader as I am. We just got there in different ways and different experiences. And I think it all starts with genuinely being a good person. And you said something earlier that struck a chord about being lazy. Leaders can get lazy too.
Yeah.
Coaches can get lazy too. You always have to stay external. And if you start getting complacent, your folks, your employees, it's gonna be obvious. But I have a friend. Actually a close friend out in California. He's a senior vice president, and he came from more of the operational side of construction, like superintendent. Like the dude built the tallest tower west of the Mississippi, Salesforce Tower.
Nice.
Yeah, fantastic builder. And he struggles with people in his teams. Like he's more the guy that would just kick down the door and want to just be the typical stereotypical construction guy. And the problem is what he doesn't recognize is that he's being a selfish leader. He's doing what he thinks is the way to approach the situation. I'm going to scare these people. I'm going to intimidate these people so they do it faster and do it better for me. I'd rather be, intimidating. Although effective for some people, the problem is it's not selfless leadership. And he needs to be able to strike a chord with each person in their unique way to get the most out of them in an unselfish manner. Not what does John need, what do those that I lead need? And it's never on a group level either. It's down to the individual basis of if I was leading a guy like my friend that I just described, I would interact with him a little bit differently, a little bit more, we call it a little bit more firmness or intensity than I would somebody that's not softer, but just different. You have to approach it, you need to provide what that person needs. And that's not a Marine Corps thing. That's not a Corps Cadets thing. That's just, in my opinion, that's human nature, and that's what's right.
Well, I love that comment. My dad used to tell me all the time, he said, I never pulled rank on anybody because I felt if I had to pull rank on somebody, I failed.
Never. That is the absolute last worst case scenario.
That's the last case.
Talking to a captain. I mean, So when I described, there was some major changes in style, and that's okay as we go from kind of phase of your life, and I can relax more. And I had a role model. He was a Marine Corps gunner, which is a chief warrant officer, Gunner Yates, and he was just the coolest freaking dude. The Marines loved him. And it was like, aha, that fits me. I'm going to be totally the other side of what you expect as a Marine officer. It's okay to be relaxed and cool and chilled to the point, like, a Marine salutes you and he said, hey, don't worry about that. Or they Marines all stand up, you get to attention when you walk in them. It's like, guys, come on, sit down. It's just us right now. Okay. Like that seemed to resonate and be more effective than the guy that's really proud of being a captain and loves all the pomp and circumstance. So that was the example I was, and I tried to continue to carry that, be something that everybody's not expecting you to be. You may look a certain way and talk a certain way, but it's always seemed to be very influential when you surprise people that, you're a little bit more pleasant to be with than what they expected, etc. So
yeah, or a guy like you who's 6'3" and looks like he could kill you with his bare hands turns out to be a giant woman for the most part.
Yeah, that's right.
Sensitive guy. But the other thing you said there, John, and by the way, for people that aren't familiar with the military jargon, pulling rank basically means saying, I outrank you, do what I say. That's essentially what that means. And so it would be the same thing in the business world, is your boss saying,
I'm a vice president.
do what I say because I'm your boss. And I'm here to tell you that I've been around people like that, and they're shitty leaders. Like, for somebody to say, I want you to do this because I outrank you in the business world is totally ineffective, as opposed to saying, I want you to do this because we're on a team and here's what we're trying to accomplish and here are the goals and here's what we're trying to get at. I mean, and the other thing you said, John, which I think is a really good tip for leadership, is you can kind of pick and choose different things you see from different leaders and kind of create your own individual style. And so that made me think about, I used to work a long time ago, almost 20 years ago. I used to work for these two guys when I was first started practicing as a lawyer, and they had completely and totally different approaches. One person, the approach was, do this. And then we'd meet on Saturdays, and then the next Saturday he'd go, why didn't you do this? 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 The other person I worked for would say, here are 30 or 20 or 30 cases. If you have any questions, ask me. Otherwise, let me know when you successfully won them. And what I found, John, was the first person, the only thing I did was what he told me. That was it. I was like, I'm just going down this list. I'm going to knock this out, but I'm not going to do anything else. The other person had invested so much. I felt like he invested so much trust in me, right, that I was like, what can I do to get the best result? And he's trusts me, and so I don't want to let that person down. And so that made a huge impression on me in terms of, at least from my personality, I was much more motivated by somebody who I felt trusted me to make some of my own decisions. And so I tell my young lawyers all the time now, they'll say, well, what do you think we should do about this? And my response, it's kind of comical, is literally every time, well, what do you think we should do?
Right.
I want to know what you think. I didn't hire you to just take orders from me. I hired you because you're a smart person. I want to know your opinion.
Yep.
So speak to that.
And then in most cases, they want to share your opinion. But at the same time, Brian, and this comes back to that unselfish leader, is there are some people that need to just be given that list.
Yeah, that's right.
There's some people that would rather just have the whole ball field to play on, and that's up to us as leaders. And it's not always an easy thing. Have you ever heard of the DISC assessment?
No, huh?
It's much like any other character assessments, but in any one of them can work. But it'll just give you an indication of what your team, on an individual level, of what makes them tick and how do they need to be treated. And every single one is always different, and not one of them is just like me. So I can't lead everybody just the same way I want to be led. That to me, I can't read a leadership book, Brian. Yeah. I used to, but they all seem to say the same thing.
Yeah.
I think if you stick with that, and it starts, for us, it started, our fish year. And I swear it was like, yep, I like the way Matt just did, or Mr. Good did that to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that in my pocket. And the next year, you start to practice with these things until, you get the same, rapport, and you see the little sparkle in their eyes that, Mr. Warren, he kind of pulled away the mean face and actually, connected with me. That is so rewarding. And that it's the same thing that happens then as it did through the Marine Corps or with you and into the business world now. And it's rewarding, very fulfilling.
Well, John, we've been going for about an hour and a half. This doesn't surprise me because I knew you and I were going to talk for a while.
I feel like there's some uncovered ground here still.
I do too, and we could talk for another hour or two, but there are a couple questions that I really want to ask you. I've asked most of my guests this particular question, and to be totally candid with you, one of the reasons I'm asking people this question is because I don't know the answer. I'm kind of trying to find the answer myself, and so I feel super fortunate to be able to ask this question to guys like you, girls like Dr. East, the U.S. Congressman. And the question is this: we're going through right now some of the most difficult times our country's ever been through, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's race relations, the police brutality stuff. We've got the politics, which is completely insane. And so I'm curious what your views are on how we kind of get through this and emerge. I want to emerge, not just to get through it. I'm hoping that we emerge as a country even stronger as a result of this. But what are your views?
You know what? You're right. And that was so disappointing to see, some of the movement and the protests, especially when they really began. I think it was in late March, early April. But up to that point, I remember Carrie and I were talking. It's like this is going to be better for us. We haven't had something like 9/11, in 20 years, and this is going to unify the country.
Yeah.
It's going to make us stronger. And unfortunately, it was quite the opposite. And I still can't figure out if this was just this quagmire, just ready to just explode, which it did. But to answer your question, I said this earlier. Coach Slocum, be part of the solution. I heard that and I was like, you're absolutely spot on, but it's not always easy in these times that we can be part of the solution. Although I will tell you, I'm not going to make matters worse. I'm not going to rant and rave on social media. I'm going to make the most of our situation and try to lead my team and my group through these challenges. And not one of us, and Brian, you said there's two outcomes. I think there's many more, and none of them are going to be easy. And it depends on what side of this you sit on. I'm not necessarily speaking politically or racial BLM type of stuff, or was this some sort of biowarfare? Who knows? But it was definitely a warning of what could continue in a different form and in many different ways. I mean, this is not something that we were familiar with and studying. You heard the predictions, which are mind-blowing to hear people predict really what has occurred. But I even think of white-tailed deer and chronic wasting disease and the prions and all of these dangerous organisms that are just, a few years away from mutating in some way that could hurt human beings. So all I can say is that there's challenges that we've each gone through personally, whether it's a divorce or financial problems or losing loved ones. It's the similar challenges that these are going to create for us and the world moving forward. And just like those other challenges, is you just have to remain positive and make the most of your situation, whether it's your family, your friends, or your business, because we can't predict the future right now. So, and I don't know what Blake Sawyer's response is, but I can see how Blake would act in this situation. That was the most positive leader with the can-do spirit regardless how bad it was, Blake could overcome anything because of his attitude.
Well, one of the things I've always loved about Blake in particular, and a lot of people like him, is they can hold two ideas in their head at one time. So, for instance, when did it become the rule, John, that we have to be either on the side of the police or on the side of minorities? Like, why can't we say we're on the side of the police? 99% of police are awesome people, but there are a couple bad apples and they need to get the fuck out of the department immediately. And also at the same time say there are problems with police brutality in the minority communities. We need to figure out the cause of that, and we need to try to address that and not take one side or the other. Like, when did it become the rule that we couldn't be on everybody's side? Like, we're all Americans. We're trying to get through this together. Why can't we just say, okay, there's been some problems. Tell me what your problems are. Okay, cops, there's been some problems. Tell me what your problems are, and let's work together to try to solve. It is totally and completely baffling to me.
No,
I truly down the middle. I mean,
here's what I believe, Brian. I don't believe that the entire, let's just say the whole country of minorities does not feel this way. It's this small minority group that has, they have the platform right now. But any of the minorities that I interact with, it's all laughable to them, and it's not the way they feel. To a certain degree, they're embarrassed that.
Yeah.
I look at them and I'm wondering, are you feeling this way? Is this what you truly think? No, they don't want everybody to be wondering, are you feeling this way, that, you're whatever it is. And there's a lot of things out there to be thinking right now or feeling, but, I will say this, it does come down to training, but, unless you've been in that position with a loaded firearm ready to take somebody's life, knowing that somebody else is on the other side about to take your life, it's hard to be a judge. So it comes down to training and making sure our law enforcement officers in that situation still keep their head, because that's what's happening. That's what's happening.
So what I would argue, and I've talked about this a little bit, is we don't need to defund the police. We need to provide more funding for better training. We need better trained police officers. We do not. And, one of the things that has bothered me for years, John, is I don't want to pay taxes. Nobody wants to fucking pay taxes. Of course we don't want to pay taxes. But if you don't pay taxes, who the hell is going to pay the police? Who's going to pay the military? Who's going to pay the teachers? If you really, really support the military, the police, teachers, prosecutors, judges, people like that, it doesn't mean you have to like paying taxes, but that's how they get paid. That's how they get benefits. That's how they get raises. And so this again gets back to what we're talking about is, why can't we kind of get to in other words, like, why can't we figure out what the root cause of some of these issues are and try to solve it? Like, for instance, the Breonna Taylor thing to me, okay, and this might be somewhat controversial, but I haven't seen any evidence at all, and maybe it's out there, I just haven't seen it, that this was a racially motivated shooting. What I saw was the dumbest idea in law enforcement history, literally knocking on somebody, going into somebody's house, a no-knock warrant in the middle of the night, a nonviolent offense. Of course somebody's going to shoot back. That is terrible. That puts everybody at risk. So to me, what I'm getting at there, John, is why can't we focus on like the underlying cause of some of this stuff? I don't think the Breonna Taylor thing was a racial thing. I think the Breonna Taylor thing was a result of no-knock warrants and putting good police officers in.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth, and we do this lean principle thing, the root cause analysis, to really identify what is the true cause of this. And that's what I would tell you right now is I don't know what I'm seeing, and I don't know what to believe. I don't know what's being fed to me, and how it's being filtered or manipulated across the board.
Yeah.
So I hear what I hear, and I this is where I sit right now, it comes out of training, but they could have been in the right on every single one of these instances. I just still don't have the true root cause analysis of what's occurred.
Yeah. Well, John, I kept you.
That's okay. I have a virtual doctor's appointment. I'm not sure how we're going to do that here in a minute or two. My annual checkup virtually.
Well, John, you're like we said at the very beginning of the podcast. I consider you one of my best friends. I love you to death. You're a great guy. You're an American patriot. You're a Marine Corps combat officer. You are truly a builder. We didn't even get to talk about what you're building in your backyard. Maybe we can do that on another show. But you're just one of the best guys I've ever met in my life. I consider myself fortunate to call you my friend, John. And there we go. Yeah. If you're listening to the podcast, that is unbelievable. Holy crap! If you're watching on YouTube. if you're John Warren has literally built from scratch by himself with essentially no help a giant pool in his backyard. He was just showing a video of it. I mean, literally bending rebar and stuff himself, digging that. That is unbelievable, John. But anyway, you truly are a builder, and you truly are somebody I'm not ashamed to say that I look up to. So, John, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today, my friend. I love you to death.
Love you too, buddy. Thank you.
All right, man.
All right.